Welcome everyone to another episode of ELPA podcast. We call it Small Steps, Big Changes series, building a healthier liver through everyday habits with ELPA, where we are addressing the importance of daily healthy habits and healthy lifestyle to empower our community with knowledge, motivation, and to essentially support each other along the way. And today I am happy to welcome in our podcast studio health psychologist Josip Kresović.
Hi everyone.
Hi Josip, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you for having me.
Welcome to Brussels. You flew all the way from Sweden.
Yes.
So welcome.
Thank you very much.
We are happy to have you. Josip, just to present you a little bit to our audience. So you are indeed a health psychologist, originally from Croatia. And you worked in healthcare for a lot of years. So you have a lot of experiences. You worked as counselor within the Croatian Association for HIV and Viral Hepatitis. You also collaborated with different public health institutions, hospitals, NGOs, and you are really passionate about promoting prevention and health education. Your areas of focus are also stigma, psychosocial support, and chronic disease adjustment support for HIV, hepatitis, and sexually transmitted diseases.
Exactly.
Very happy to have you here. We are today focusing on change of behavior. Very interesting topic. Would you say that overall people know what this is?
Well, I'm sure that if we would tell someone, what does it mean to change behavior, they will probably consider, maybe I should change some things that I don't like about myself. You could hear that sometimes from people. For example, I can be a bit explosive sometimes. Maybe I could change that, for example. So people will probably be oriented towards that. How can I change myself for the better? When you say change of behavior.
And is that actually true, or are there it can go deeper, I guess?
Well, I think, in general, so when we speak about personality traits, so like when you hear about, what does it mean to have a certain type of personality, so it can be subjected to change till I guess one level, but a lot of personality traits or parts of the personality traits tend to be relatively stable throughout the years. They can maybe be influenced by some really difficult life events. Maybe it can be, a chronic illness. It can be, a situation like war or natural disaster or something like that. But in general, it's a relatively stable construct. However, we can definitely work on upgrading or changing some of the manifestations of it. So if a person has an explosive way of reacting to things that's maybe not appropriate in terms of maybe work environment or personal relationships, there are some tools that people can definitely use to kind of help. Okay, let's see what we can do here, for sure.
When we speak about change of behavior, you mentioned that it's important to understand not only our conscious habits and a cautious reaction, but also unconscious ones. Research shows that about 80% of our daily habits, things, what we do, how we do it, are actually driven by unconscious habits. Is that correct?
Yeah, so in terms
of... quite a lot of...
but
quite a big number.
Absolutely. So I think it's just in terms of we are doing those habits, we're doing them consciously, but since they have become for such a long period of time, the way we work or the way we do, it just becomes something that comes naturally. So that's why we call them basically habits.
But for liver disease patients, such as mast cell and MASH patients, these automatic habits that we are that are part of our conscious mind, can sometimes work against our health goals. Right? So the good news there is, however, that with the right approach, we can reverse, we can change, we can adapt. So this is what we will be also focusing today. Right?
Yeah, let's go.
Very exciting. Let's go. So let's start firstly with the science of change of behavior. Could you share how these habits, how the habit in our mind and our brain is formed? Let's start here.
It's very interesting, actually. So the habit is something that we say in psychology, it's really an automated process. Like it happens just in and of its own, because it is basically, it becomes automated by associations that have been made through prior performance of a certain habit. So it's usually basically has a lot of impulsive part of it. So we just kind of react in a way how we feel in that moment regarding the habit, or we're performing the habit, not really thinking about it. So when we talk about the psychology of it, there's like a very low minimal cognitive effort that we are, for example, with motivational habits, or I wouldn't say habits, but maybe motivational approaches, we tend to use consciously, okay, I'm motivated for something and I want to do it, I know exactly what I want to do, so there's like a high level of cognitive effort. But with habits, there's like a low level of cognitive effort. So I just do it because it just comes naturally, because it was learned through associations, through prior performance. But what's great about our brain is it has this ability called neuroplasticity, which means that basically simpler terms would be it absorbs new information constantly, and with that new information it can then evolve and it can then develop on different things. So it's kind of constantly working and constantly evolving. That means that maybe we can actually influence all those kind of impulsive habits that we have, and maybe help in trying to lead them in a kind of a direction of, for example, better healthcare habits.
And since today we are speaking about people living with liver diseases, let's focus maybe on MASLD and MASH. So the lifestyle intervention is something that is very crucial for them. So how this neuroplasticity can play actually a huge role in changing the behavior and changing maybe for people to live healthier or to pick healthier habits every day consciously.
Exactly. Well, so for example, if we brush our teeth every day for 2 times, for example, that's something that we just do in the morning or in the night or whatever.
But also because we were taught and led to do it, right?
Exactly. So then we have been given information, and then we started doing it, and now it just happens because we know it's good for our dental health. For people that living, for example, with liver disease such as MASLD or MASH, that can be healthy habits that can be promote is definitely nutrition. So dietary habits that can improve the liver health, but also adherence to treatment. It can be different regular physical activity, for example. So those are the kind of habits that we can then try to make a part of their lives through neuroplasticity, because we can then give them information and just to show them in terms of, okay, these are the things that can actually help better your liver health.
And in the scope of like a timeline, because we all want to, always we have to, or we want to be really focused on how long will this take, and how many days for me to reach the goal. So how long does it take, for example, to go from bad habit to good habit?
So generally forming new habits, I mean, when I talk with my clients, I never really talk about in terms of number, because I feel like it gives, again, too much pressure to, okay, this needs to be done in this number of days. But if you look at the research, forming a habit can take from like 16 days to 250 days. So it really depends on the type of the habit. So there's not really like a universal number. There's like an average for a habit, it can be like 60 days. But I would rather people focusing not on the calendar and just like marking their days and how many days have passed, but just in general thinking about when they have started the habit, maybe making like a weekly or bi-weekly checkpoint, or to say, oh, I did this for this amount of time, I'm going to continue further, rather than expecting it, oh, if I don't get it in 60 days, then that means that I have failed, because that then creates a huge amount of pressure for that person. So rather than focusing on the number of when the habit will be formed, because basically the interest is that the habit basically lasts for the entire life. So maybe just focusing rather on the goal of just, weekly or bi-weekly kind of checkpoint of things. Okay, I have really been consistent with this habit.
And how do you advise to your patients how to firstly identify maybe not healthy habit, because I guess firstly you have to identify in order to start working on something and change something, right?
Exactly. So I mean, the most easiest part is basically just tracking progress. You can just journal, write in a notebook, maybe talk with a doctor, and then first the doctor maybe can give you information. Okay, these are some of the bad habits that maybe lead to this and this type of consequence. And then based on that, you can see with everyday life, you can see, okay, today I did this, this, and this, and see, okay, what is from all of this that I have written today, what does this really do for my liver health? Does it help my liver health, or does it not help my liver health? So in those terms, you can just keep like a journal of these things, and then you can work with a healthcare provider, or maybe you can work with the counselor or therapist for the psychological background of the habits. And then with that, when you are aware, as you said, when we are aware of the things that we are doing, then it's easier to kind of navigate around them and what we need to do.
So would you say that for individuals is beneficial to write these habits down, to see it like visually? We mentioned in our previous podcast that journaling, actually you wrote something down. So now this is something,
it's palpable.
It's palpable. It's there. It's out there. Do you think that this writing it down habits, it's good?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that just writing down, I think it makes you already a bit more aware of things, rather than that it's just in your mind, oh, I'm doing this and this and this. But if you have it on a piece of paper, it is what it is. So it's just a practical thing. It's really much easier than to work with that, right?
And then track the progress, or
exactly we basically track, and then as I said, like best with if it's related maybe to physical symptoms and some physical activity, you can then of course contact your health provider. Or if it's really a psychological base of the habit that you need to work on, let's say stress eating or something like that, then you work with a psychologist and say, okay, how can we see what can we do with this habit, and how could we maybe change it into something that's going to be better for our health.
What about rewards? Because I see here that research shows that rewarding ourselves can reinforce new habits. Yeah. Where are we standing with that?
It's kind of like logical. So when we do something and then we get a reward for it, we feel really good if we get a reward for anything that we do, right? So with Nick, somehow we always get back to the small steps, big changes. So basically, in terms of reward really works when you set yourself like if you have a bigger maybe goal, to set smaller goals to achieve it. So it can be after you do something, you reward yourself. Now the rewards can really vary. It really of course reinforces the brain pathways then to actually be more consistent in a certain habit, because your brain kind of connects that experience and kind of that gratification with the success that you have done. So it can be basically a food related reward, but also if we talk about liver health and maybe some other health issues that have food as a crucial factor, in terms of dietary changes, it can be kind of a healthier food mix, or maybe preparing your favorite meal. But also if you want to replace the food reward with something different, it can just be a random activity. It can be something that you enjoy to do. It can be a comforting TV show or a movie. It can be a walk with a friend or a chat with a friend. So whatever for the person that reward means. So I think to discover kind of, because some rewards will not work for some people, other rewards will, because people of course enjoy their free time very differently, so they will choose for themselves what works. But also that's sometimes where a psychologist can also be helpful, like just in terms of discerning, okay, this may be actually good for you. So if a person maybe has liver disease, maybe we can just tailor that to that person, or what could be good rewards for your healthcare, for your health and lifestyle.
Where do you see the role of visualization? Because sometimes the reward can be also that you not only feel good, but you maybe have some visual changes in your, on your body. So how this concept of visualization, let's maybe firstly define it, what actually this is. So we all know what we are talking about, and then let's maybe go deeper into that.
So visualization is also one of the things that we have also spoken about in previous podcasts, that in terms of how we tend to take some things from psychology and then kind of it gets watered down to something that's really way too simplified. So in visualization would be, if you ask any person that has ever seen an information about visualization on social media, would be, oh, I will visualize my goal and it will come true. It will help me to make it come true. But visualization here is a bit of a tricky one. So for some people it can work, for other people it doesn't really work. It's actually research has shown that if you focus too much on visualization of a bigger goal, it can give you much more anxiety rather than motivation. But I think that we need to approach visualization in a bit of a different way. So for example, if you are a patient with a chronic illness and maybe your goal is to every day to take a walk, for example, and then you may think about as a visualization, oh, when I take that walk I will be so happy. I can visualize myself being at home and being so happy, for example, and that can maybe be a motivation to take that walk. However, you never really know what can happen. You know, maybe that day you have a really bad day, maybe you are in pain, maybe whatever thing that can happen, you may not feel really happy afterwards. So you may feel like this doesn't really work, I'm not really happy with it. But so my advice would be to focus on the process rather than the end goal. So if you are going to take a walk, think about or visualize what you want to see on the walk, or what you would like to see. Oh, I will I don't know, see my favorite building, or I will maybe see some friends that live in the neighborhood, or maybe I will smell the spring air, or see the park, or whatever you feel like you will experience on that walk. So just in terms of giving yourself just the opportunity to enjoy the process of it rather than the end goal. So I think that's always the best. So you can have the end goal in kind of in sight, but visualization works better when you think about the process of getting to that goal rather than the picture of, oh, I'm really happy. One day I will be happy, for example, right? So it's always best to focus on the process rather than the end goal.
But is this visualization advice something that it's like close to people you work with, or is it more like something still a little bit voodoo?
Visualization in terms of course, I think that I would never advise people to if you visualize it, it will happen. Of course not. I just think that visualize yourself doing things that will get you to that process, because that's just a good exercise to help. For example, I did have one client that we worked with visualization in terms of his graduation degree, where we kind of visualized in terms of, okay, but visualize yourself studying in terms of like, okay, how does your space look like? Try to organize it like that. So it's not really predicting what's going to happen, but rather trying to visualize the process of how it's going to look. And then you will be more motivated to work through the process rather than, oh, I'm going to, finish this degree in this amount of time. So it's not really, of course, predicting that something is going to happen. It's rather just focusing on the process and thinking about producing kind of those positive emotions that you will associate with the process.
And that will actually lead you to make an action, right?
Exactly.
End up at the end goal.
Exactly. So I think that people sometimes misunderstand visualization in terms of like, oh, if I just visualize it, it will definitely happen. So that's, that's a different part of, that's not really my area of expertise.
Josip, when it comes to making long-lasting changes, marking progress can be incredibly motivating, as we said. Journaling, making this track of progress, or looking where you maybe are lacking a little bit. Do you recommend that patients track their progress in some way? And how can sharing their journey with others encourage them or keep them motivating? So, one thing is, us sitting in a closed room writing our own thoughts, but the other thing is, I guess, going out there, sharing maybe your setbacks, maybe also your lack of motivation, not just the good things, right?
Yeah. Exactly. So, of course, as we said before, like journaling, that can be also if it's related to dietary, for example, dietary habits. There's a ton of apps that people can use to just track their intake of food and what they need to eat in order to be healthy. Of course, I always advise not to be too obsessive over this, but just, of course, if you have a dietary regime that you need to follow that's related maybe to your liver disease, of course, you need to follow it. So like a good idea is to just track and write down. So that's but also not just like things related to nutrition. It can be moods, for example. How do I feel today? It can be just, a small note. And then you can maybe track over time to see how does your mood change, and maybe identify the time of the day or maybe the month, how you feel, and has your mood changed for whatever reason. So I think that's also a really useful tool. For social media, for example, we also talked about how it's a good thing to share your experience with others. Maybe even join organizations that are really focused on the issue that you have also had, because a lot of people feel like they're alone in these situations, especially if we talk about different diseases that are kind of very specific. So I think that's also a big deal, because in that way you are strengthening your relationships with others, you're connecting, but also you're alleviating that burden of feeling that you're doing it all just by yourself. So that's also like something that's really important. It helps also with emotional regulation and with all these other things that are related to experiencing and living with the chronic disease. Because if you haven't lived through it, even I as a psychologist that have been with patients who have been through it, I would never say that just because I know the background of it or the psychological background of it, I will never know, hopefully, that how does that feel. So I think that if for them, to hear that from other people, I think it's useful, for people who have gone through the same thing. It's very important.
But also, as you said, so joining a community support group is important. But as you mentioned, journaling doesn't have to be like writing a long essays, right? Sometimes it can be just, okay, after this walk, I feel very good or great. And then just going back and see what type of activities really improve your mood and make you feel better, and then encourage you, and maybe what type of activities are really like dragging you down, or you don't feel very good about them, right? So at the end of the day, assess your own thoughts, your own emotions and feelings, right? Not just following the crowd. That's what I want to say.
Exactly. That's why when you look back at it, just because we tend to when we experience something, I felt like that, and like that. But if you have never written it down, you can maybe look a couple of weeks behind and see, oh look, I felt this way and this helped me that day, for example. So that's also an interesting way to approach journaling, of course.
So I also hear from our patient advocates that these small actions can make a very big difference, and when they are shared with others, and they can create this ripple effect, right? Helping patients maintain their commitment to healthy lifestyle changes, which is very important for our MASLD and MASH patients, as we mentioned before. Let's touch maybe on the environment we grew up in. I'm giving you the floor.
That's a big thing, because of course people come from very different backgrounds, so every kind of approach needs to be tailored. Like for me as a health psychologist, it's always a challenge to see okay, this person comes from this area, this is their socioeconomic state, this is their state of family support. So there's such a wide variety of situations that people are in. So for example, if we're talking about health habits and lifestyle habits, so of course that research will always show that people who have grown up learning about these lifestyle habits, and maybe it runs in the family in terms of like healthy eating and exercising, they tend to follow the same pattern, which is of course very good. For other people, just like for people who maybe don't have that financial stability, access to food can be a problem, because to purchase, especially today, just like good quality organic food is very expensive. So for some people that's also not an option. So to kind of navigate also that within their situation, okay, how can I tailor for them a certain plan of lifestyle habits? Maybe access to a personal trainer or a gym or a nutritionist. That's also not everybody don't have that same opportunity. So then, okay, what can we do for these people in those situations? Because I think that's also very important. So it doesn't really depend on just the media or what. Of course, it has a big part of it, but also where we come from is a huge part of it. So I think that in terms of environment, it's really problematic then to kind of discern because it needs to be tailored for each person, for sure.
And I think I read it somewhere that also our self-esteem, self-confidence is really built up in these young ages, right?
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
this childhood period is extremely important. I guess also how our habits and how our quality of life will be developed in the next years. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, kids are just like sponges. They will just absorb any information that you give them. So what is important with this is, and I always stress for maybe parents that are concerned that I have counseled before, is that if you really don't, if a child has a question about anything, and basically a kid learns by a model, so it will learn by its parents and its environment. But if you don't give them an answer to a question, for example, if we're talking about healthy habits, oh, you have to eat this because I said so. We can learn. You can hear that from like a lot of parents. But that's not really a reason, because the kid will then interpret, okay, I have to eat this because she said so or he said so. What does that mean? So it's a bit, so they will always look for information. If they don't have the answer, they will look information in different places. And we all know, like, they can maybe ask in the kindergarten or in school, and who knows what information they will get there. So building this self-confidence means that we need to include the kids into kind of decision-making process around food, around physical activity. And that can just be like, maybe choosing a favorite fruit, or choosing like a favorite, maybe you can go cycle or to the park, whatever the kid seems to be interested in. So that's what's also very important. That's kind of builds the self-confidence, rather than just leaving like the kid in the dark about why they need to do things just because the parents said they need to do it.
And maybe just a side question, like from the science background of creation of habits. When is like the best time in our lifetime to still be able to change our habits?
I think that, the most sensitive time, I would say, would be, of course, during growing up, because those are like the periods when, since kindergarten and up, where kind of kids develop their like sense of identity, and that's basically where they absorb all the information. And that's why, for example, when you're learning a language, of course, if you learned a second language later in your life, it will never be that well as if you started learning it when you were, 5 or 6 years old, right? Because that's basically what we call like a critical period of development, where all the information kind of absorbs the best in a way. And then through development of the brain, it kind of becomes like a certain way of, habitual, let's say. But of course, that does not mean that later in life you cannot change your habits. But, during growing up...
That's what I wanted to stress out, that there is always time to change.
Because, we develop, our prefrontal cortex develops after 25 years old. So we have like there's a lot of period of growing up throughout. As a parent, you can, of course, instill really good habits with your children. But that really just depends, of course, on what you want to focus on. But of course, whenever in your life, there are different tools that people can use to maybe upgrade behaviors that they think they need to work on.
And just now jumping from maybe younger generation to elderly, where do you think that they struggle the most? So let's say that you work with them, that you explain all of this theory, that like okay, everything is possible, but now we need to work on practical things. Where are they struggling the most?
Well, also different things, and also depends on, so if a person has, for example, good support, if I can assess, okay, this person has really good family support, then I know that this maybe lifestyle or advice that I'm giving them, it's going to work pretty well. For people who don't have that, then of course I would probably work with them a bit more in terms of like a session, counseling sessions or something like that. But in general, I would say usually it's the frustration that why I'm working this, why doesn't this happen overnight? That's like the usual one. Why doesn't it happen faster? Or after one counseling session, they will be, oh, well, now I feel okay, I don't think I need to come again anymore. And I'm like, okay, let's revisit this the next time you come. And it's usually, but when the kind of habit of, also a habit in a way, of counseling gets going, it really, you can see exponential progress with that. But also, again, I think that people have different perception of what motivation is, because you can see again, with the social media, there are people, oh, they're 100% motivated all the time, but that's not really how motivation works. It just goes up and down, and that's normal. So when it goes down, you know that it's going to go up. So just kind of explaining and giving information how actually the psychology behind it works. It always makes easier for them to accept, okay, I had a bad day, and it will pass. I will have a better day, maybe tomorrow or next week or whenever. So that's also a big problem. And sometimes they do feel like they're kind of falling back to their old behavioral patterns, which is also a normal part of the process. So I think that's why those cold turkey, as we call them, decisions, oh, I'm going to stop smoking tomorrow, rarely work. So it really needs to be a consistent process throughout time. And you will have bad days, as I said, and good days. Just keeping the consistency of it, because it really, in that way, you release all the pressure that you put on yourself, but then over time you see the results, and that's basically the best road to go with it.
I'm curious, how does like the very first session with you look like?
Oh yeah, okay, that's a good question. Well, it depends first of all on the diagnosis. For me, I think the first thing, what's important is how, as I said, first of all, kind of to check what is the mental resilience of the person. So, okay, does the person have all the information that they need? How do they usually react? Like, is this something that's freshly diagnosed? So they're really kind of panicking. They're really not sure what's going on. And then I will focus on the support system. I will usually focus, okay, you know, family members, do you have somebody that you can talk to? How is the situation there? And then it really kind of depends. So in my case, since it was usually voluntarily that people will come in, so then they will stay for a couple of sessions. Sometimes they will just come one time, and then, so it kind of, again, depends on the people. But I would definitely first identify these core things, like whether they have like a good support system, because I know that when they go home, like from my counseling session, they really need to kind of work more with people that are the people around them. But if I have patients, for example, that's an often case with, for example, HIV patients, which are different from liver patients, but in terms of stigma, so they usually do not like to disclose the diagnosis to anybody else. So usually I'm the only one that they are talking to about it. So it really kind of then, I'm more involved in the process of support rather than maybe a person with liver disease, because usually then I would, you know, see this person doesn't really have a good family support, and then we can see what we can do about it. But luckily in my association we had a good multidisciplinary team, so then I can just delegate them to a social worker that we had, maybe a lawyer if necessary, a specialist, hepatologist, gastroenterologist, or whatever it needs to be. But also then, of course, I would go with them. Usually they will ask me, okay, how will I keep doing this, you know, and then they will maybe call in a few months and say, I haven't really done my healthy things that I need to do, so how can I maybe implement that again? And then basically what I said, I would just go with them, okay, why don't we just make a plan to see what you need to do, and basically constantly, and that's usually something that I need to repeat all the time for it to really kind of to stay with them, is basically that the difference between the good and the bad days. Because as soon as they kind of fall back to the behavior patterns that they had before, they see it as a complete disaster. But then I have to just gently work around that and just say, okay, this is something that's part of the process. We just continue. This is the day how it is today, you just continue further. So basically, again, depends on the client, but we would usually focus on like those things, like, you know, why don't I have motivation? Why do I fall back to my patterns? And then just kind of rewiring them to continue. Yeah.
Would you agree that our mind sometimes play tricks on us?
Oh yeah, of course, all the time. All the time, of course. I think that what's fascinating to me about the brain, that it can be such an amazing, powerful tool, but then at the same time it can be just incredibly like, what? It's just, yeah, it's just the way that I just love, first of all, I just love how it makes connections about things, and sometimes those connections are true and good, and sometimes it just makes like these wild conclusions about, you know, especially for example people with high anxiety or something like that. So I'm always fascinated how at the same time it can be such an efficient organ, but then in other cases it can be like complete chaos. So that's something like what I really love about the brain. So it definitely plays tricks on us. Yeah, absolutely.
And is that when you say we need strong mental resilience to actually stop in that moment to say, no, this is maybe not that real as I am experiencing it in this moment.
Yeah.
Let's step back, let's refocus.
Exactly, just reevaluate the situation, because that's what it kind of gets with practice, and it really does not change. Like, for example, people often think, especially my clients, they think, oh, you know, you're a psychologist, you must be so good at navigating like all of these emotions. And I'm like, no, I'm the same as you, like in terms of like being a human being. But for me, it just becomes a bit of a practice. You learn how to kind of navigate all of that. You learn how to identify what really, oh, this struck me in a different way. I'm not really sure why, or why did my brain just go to this conclusion? But just thinking about just reevaluating a bit, and that's it. Just kind of taking a step back, not really engaging immediately in it, but just kind of, okay, let's see, why is this happening right now? So I think for me in my like psychotherapy training, that was like the most interesting thing to just kind of constantly just, okay, let's reevaluate, let's see this, why is this here, let's see, because in that way you kind of train yourself to not really be so I would say so emotionally invested in a certain emotion or something that's happening, but like in a very healthy way, because I need to experience my emotion as any other human being, like fear, anxiety, crying, whatever. It's basically part of the human experience. But it's just that the approach of it is a bit different. Then you kind of always practice how to see, okay, that emotion needs to be expressed in whatever way it needs to be expressed. But then after that, when it's expressed, you know, you need to have that mental resilience to kind of just go back, just get up again, right? So it's just a bit of a different approach when, like a trained psychologist or a therapist. That's why when I'm in a situation where a patient tells me they're, you know, sometimes terrifying life stories, you know, it can be really intense, especially at the beginning of my career. But then you really learn how to deal with all these emotions that other people bring also onto you. So it's just a bit, of course, training and a lot of kind of self-awareness and self-consciousness. But that's something that people can generally learn. You know, if you go to therapy or work with the counselor, you can just learn to identify those emotions, and then you can learn how to work with them for sure. Yeah.
So a big step you're saying of change of behavior is indeed this re-evaluation. So be able to step back and see it from like a bigger picture, right?
Yeah.
Maybe put emotions a little bit aside per se, and
I wouldn't say that. No, I wouldn't say put. I think I know what you mean. I think it's a combination.
To make a rational, you know, next step.
I think it's definitely a combination of both, because I think that behavior in terms of and our thoughts, they're also, of course, very important to work with. But also, I think that the emotion needs to be expressed, no matter what it is. It just needs to be. Of course, I'm not talking about really destructive things, but like in general, the emotions need to be expressed. So I think there needs to be a balance between focusing on the thoughts and the emotions, because if the emotion is not really expressed in the most healthiest way, then of course it will find its way in something else. It will find itself in maybe obsessive compulsive actions. It can be resentment, it can be jealousy, all these other things. So emotions should be expressed always, but of course then you need to just be aware how to navigate it, so you don't really do it, you know, at work or, you know, in situations where you feel like this is not appropriate. But because there's always a way of communicating that emotion, like in a manner that can be understood by others. But the basics of that is just setting good boundaries, to know what doesn't work for you, to know what you like, what you don't like. Those are things that are very important, and that's basically the basis of mental resilience. When you feel like, oh, you have crossed my line a bit, and I don't think I want to engage with this anymore. In that way, you have admitted your emotion. I feel like you are violating my space, so that emotion is then expressed. You didn't really, you know, you didn't keep it inside, but you said it in a way that's honest and direct. You know, this is really bothering me. You have crossed my line. I need you to not do that again, or, you know, whatever the next step is, conversation or, you know, whatever. So that's basically, you can rationalize it in a way that you can communicate it, but also it needs to be expressed. Like every emotion needs to be expressed in that way, right?
Would you say that we overall are getting more inclined to these type of conversations where we are really experiencing some deep shock or trauma. In our case, for example, liver cancer, you know, these harder or bigger diagnosis, more complicated diagnosis. Do you think that then we are more open to go deep and, you know,
well, yes, because
look at these bags that we are carrying with us?
Yeah, I mean, there's a small percentage of people that sometimes they really do not want to engage with that because it's really too terrifying for them. And that's sometimes also a good part of the process. I mean, good in terms of when you work with a counselor, then I will not force that, but it will just come naturally. But of course, with any kind of life event that's this huge, you know, even with positive like events in life, like for example a wedding or whatever that means that it always carries a certain amount of stress. But with these when you feel like your life is threatened in a way, that's really a time when the person really kind of reevaluates everything. And we can always see that, of course, with people who are terminal, for example. That's a really completely different mental situation that people who have never gone through it will never really understand, because that's just such a huge like difference on how we view life, for example, unlike them. So definitely that's usually is the time when people tend to open up more, for sure.
Josip, we are slowly coming to the end of our podcast. Very valuable information. I think change of behavior is extremely important, especially with mast cell patients, also liver cancer. I think everything falls at the end in the same box. So I'm giving you the floor for any final statement. You said a lot of things.
Yeah.
How should we wrap it up?
I think that definitely, I think with anything in life, if we have a decision regarding, you know, working on yourself in terms of, okay, what can I feel, what can I see, what can I do to maybe better some things that I'm not really happy about. I think people need to understand that we as people, we are if you think of a puzzle, basically there's 1,000 pieces in a puzzle. If it's a puzzle made of 1,000 pieces, but so every piece is equally important. So we all have maybe some parts of ourselves that we're not really satisfied with. There are other parts that we're very satisfied with, but that's also what makes us as a whole. So we don't really exist. So we don't exist as one piece of the puzzle. We only exist as all the pieces of the puzzle together. So that means not everything in people tend to have this idea, oh, I want to change completely, I want to start from, you know, but try to see what's already there, you know, try to accept everything within you, what's happening. And then if you want to maybe work on lifestyle changes or habit changes or something like that, that's like easily done in terms of like following the advice of just taking small steps and really celebrating those steps. So if you have a big goal, try to really kind of separate it into these small achievable goals that you can do every day, and then basically just being consistent about that. And of course, along with everything else, I believe that we have already emphasized is basically that connection with others. For some that can be family, for some that can be a partner, it can be a friend, it can be a counselor, whoever you feel. And I think everybody in our lives, everybody has that one person maybe that we feel like, maybe it's a best friend or whoever. So I think that just communicating about that is also really, really important, and then the whole image will come through.
Very nice closure. Josip, thank you very much for being with us. Very valuable information. I'm sure our audience will use them. And I'm really looking forward to our next podcast.
Absolutely.
I'm sure we will come up with some interesting topic.
Yeah,
thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you all, and we see you soon. Bye.